From panic attacks to a lack of good snacks, this is Maesterminds. Welcome back, everybody, to Nerdist House of the Dragon podcast. I'm Dan Casey, and once again, we're here to bring you the best roast that Westeros has to offer with our weekly breakdown of House of the Dragon Season 2. Now, Episode 5 lowered our blood pressure pretty significantly after the shocking ending of Episode 4. But the 5th episode had a little bit of everything. Uncomfortably sexy nightmares, high-stakes surgery, and poor decision-making by men in effete blonde wigs. Now, we're going to dive deep into this episode for you in just a moment, but first, joining me as always on our small council is Nerdist staff writer, our resident lore master, and Masaria's man on the streets, Michael Walsh.
Thank you for having me, Dan. I had big plans this weekend. I was going to have a dragon's head paraded through the streets of Boston, but I think that I'm going to have to cancel that. Seems like a bad idea.
As someone who grew up in Massachusetts as well, I do think it would probably go over pretty well in the Boston area. But, they would also never call Boston King's Landing, or would throw their dragon tea back in the harbor. But, Mikey, I'm curious, we saw some secret missions this episode. Where in Westeros or beyond would you most like to be sent on a secret mission?
Oh, well, speaking of Boston, it's currently about 198% humidity here. It is like walking on the very wet sun. That's a thing, I think, right? You can have
yes,
a wet
of course.
Sun. Yeah.
Why not? If Star Wars can have 2 dry suns, we can have 1 wet sun.
So I believe I would go north of the wall right now. I would go north of the wall wearing nothing but a bathing suit so I could cool off.
That sounds pretty appealing, all things considered. But the way they blast the AC here in the office, it does feel like it's north of the wall sometimes. But then you walk outside and you're back in the Dornish marches, aka back in hell. All right, folks, that's enough banter from us. We're going to break down the episode for you in just a moment. But first, a spoiler warning. If you have not seen House of the Dragon Season 2, Episode 5, this is your one and only warning. Now, with that said, book spoilers will be kept to a minimum. But if you haven't seen the episode yet, you should leave now before you hear something well and truly shocking.
What do you want?
All right, let's get into it, shall we? Mikey, what were your overall impressions of Episode 5? We are now officially in the back half of the season.
Sometimes, Dan, people accuse us of being hot and cold on the show. I have great news for them. This was the most totally fine, okay episode in House of the Dragon history.
It's also, our reaction is, it's fitting. It's a song of ice and fire. If it's just fire all the time, we got to come in hot, we come in cold sometimes. I agree with you. This was like, not a nothing burger. This was just like, it felt like table setting. It felt like an episode you would get at the very beginning of the season where they're kind of like resetting the board, which I understand. We had a pretty momentous occasion that happened in Episode 4 with the battle at Rook's Rest, and everyone sort of reeling from that this episode. With that said, there's only 3 episodes left in the season after this, so I do think that things are going to escalate prodigiously and expeditiously. But how did this compare to the rest of the season for you so far?
There's nothing here that's really that bad, and there's also nothing here that I think is really that good. Like we don't hit the highs that the season has hit, but we don't hit the lows either. There is stuff to like. There is stuff to criticize. Like you said, it feels like a table-setting episode. I actually think it feels a lot like a Game of Thrones season finale. If you go back and watch Game of Thrones, the penultimate episodes, the episode 9, when they were doing 10-episode seasons, that's where the big things usually happened, and then we would sort of like see the fallout from that and start to reset the pieces. And that's fine. They've kind of structured this like an album, right? We're flipping it over to the other side now, and we're starting basically the next chapter in the story. I think you're right, based on the things that those of us who know the story know what's coming. I think we are going to be picking up the pace quite a bit in the final 3 episodes. If we're not picking up the pace, I don't know what's going to happen.
Yeah, if they're not picking up the pace, then I think they're just really they're going to go off script, as it were, in terms of like how it relates back to the book. I feel like if they're going to sort of stay with these characters as we see them right now and not really hit the gas pedal, then I think we're going to be getting a lot of stuff that isn't necessarily textual to the source material, but it could be a cool exploration of some of these characters. I like some of what they're doing with how they're expanding. I'm a little cold on what they're doing with some of the other characters. We'll get into that in a little bit. But with that said, what worked the best for you this episode, or what didn't work for you?
This episode had some amazing one-liners. Inside baseball here, I put together extensive notes, and they're really meant just for Dan and I. And I come across like a lunatic in these notes, like I just stream of conscience, like just coming out. And I just kept writing banger, wow, boom, like Batman was beating me up during all of this. Alicent telling Cole, she's talking about, is your loyalty so fleeting, and she also tells him, I didn't give you leave to use my name. Hugh's wife has an amazing line there. And on top of those individual lines of dialogue I loved, there are also, as always, some great performances here. Olivia Cooke is so good in this episode.
Oh, yeah.
That's one thing I never take for granted with this show, even when it's doing stuff I don't like. It's the same was true with Game of Thrones. Even when I thought it was falling apart, the performances are great, even if they don't always have the best material. Here, There's no issues with the material here, though. Nothing major.
No, everyone, as per usual, is acting their ass off in a good way. And even characters that you may never see again, they still get some real one-liners, like the head of the Brackens, when he just says, we choose fire, then like turns around to like ride away. And they frame it in such a way where you're like, oh, he's about to be like... but he's going to be turned into human brisket. He's going to get the Aegon treatment real fast. And then the hard cut to Damon and Willem Blackwood just sitting in a field. It's fantastic. So there's some real killer moments in this episode. But I want to start things off by talking about where things are not going super well, and that is King's Landing. This has been an episode of contrasts. We see the sort of serene beauty, but also morose air hanging over Dragonstone. And we also see the utter horror and chaos of the streets of King's Landing compared to the sort of frenetic and like feverish inner workings of the Red Keep and the castle. So let's talk about the situation in King's Landing, especially with the small folk. What was your takeaway from this? Because this feels like they're starting to pay off these little one-liners that we've been hearing all season long.
Even before that, I love the way they use the small folk to world build and show how important dragons are and how they're viewed by people who aren't in power. That parade of Melee's head through King's Landing, where you have someone yelling out, "This is an ill omen." I thought they were gods. The dragons are so new to Westeros. It's not that the people of Westeros don't know dragons exist, but that was on the other side of the world. Imagine, even if something's there, if you don't see a dragon, right? If you don't see a dragon, it's very different.
Yes.
And they're feared, but they're also revered, right? They are loved. They offer protection. They make the people of Westeros feel special, right? Who's going to come and invade us when we've got the only dragons? And to see one of them dead is upsetting. They're all upset, right? And not only are they upset because of what it means for what they thought about dragons, they also know you shouldn't probably do this because Rhaenyra has dragons and she's going to come burn us all. Like, she's going to come get revenge. You just told us she killed a child?
Yes.
You told us she killed a child? What is she going to do now? And we see later in the episode, Aemond, after he's named Regent, is like, oh, people are fleeing the city. Well, of course they're fleeing the city. They're terrified. There's no food. Prices are going up. There's a blockade. They can't even get stuff if they have money to buy it. And he locks them in. And it just shows that they don't even understand the people they're trying to rule. It's really
just
stupid.
A huge socioeconomic gulf really on display in this episode. I thought it was super effective how they showed trying to find the fruit that has the least amount of mold on it. People just stealing in the marketplace. People are in line to get presumably a bowl of the brown, the signature dish of flea bottom in King's Landing. And there's barely enough to give people more than they can't even get a full ladleful of this stuff. And just seeing that contrasted with the extremely tone-deaf dragon head parade, where the thing that threw me for a loop is, Sir Criston Cole should ostensibly be the people's champ. He is someone who is not born into a wealthy house. He has ascended to these great heights. You'd think that he might have a better head on his shoulders instead of a giant head on a wagon behind him. But he seems to not even register why people wouldn't be stoked to see a beast of myth made flesh and then decapitated and having this like fly-riddled horror show dragged through the streets while you can't afford to feed your family. It's just a huge miscalculation from him, but I do like some of the other stuff they do with Kristen Cole later this episode with sort of how he is processing the events of Rook's Rest, and we'll get to that in a little bit. But my favorite line, you sort of touched on the first part of that. This kid standing next to Hugh says, "I thought dragons was gods," and he just says, "Just meat." And I was like, that is killer. It's killer because it's just, seeing these people have their faith shattered in these godlike beings. I think about Game of Thrones, like the first time you saw Daenerys walk through fire unharmed. I feel like that is the perception people have of the Targaryens and the dragons, and that is just, very much not the case these days in Westeros.
It also made me wonder what dragon meat tastes like. I don't think you can eat it.
That's something I do wonder about. We gotta someone message George R.R. Martin on his live journal that's no longer a live journal. I'm very curious if there's ever talk about this because I would eat a dragon in a heartbeat. I would absolutely try it.
It's fire made flesh. You can't eat fire, right? Like I feel like if you
it's okay. I like spicy food.
I don't know, spicy food that might melt your esophagus.
Yeah, well, I'm not gonna have a dragon Bloody Mary. We saw what happened last time when people get covered in dragon blood. But you put that bad boy on ice, or maybe a little salt and some pepper, some oregano, thyme. You've got a dragon stew going.
I'll let you try it.
Yeah, please. I'll be the guinea pig here.
I've eaten a lot of weird stuff for this website. I'll let you eat the deadly dragon meat.
It's my turn, and it's how I would want to go. But let's talk about other people going, and if that was the way they wanted, Rook's Rest. We get a real reckoning with the Battle of Rook's Rest here. Obviously, it was a huge mistake to parade Maelyse's head through the city, but I think Gwaine Hightower raises probably the most accurate question. He's like, it's a strange victory, if you can even call it one. So, was Rook's Rest really a victory, or has it done more damage than anything else so far?
It probably was a real victory. They traded their idiot king and his beautiful dragon that wasn't nearly as fierce as Maelyse, and they got rid of their idiot king for now, while also getting rid of Rhaenyra's best advisor, wisest advisor, and after Damon, probably her best warrior, as a dragon rider. But they screw it up. They take what they can sell as a big victory and they screw it up with this parade, which instantly is treated like a loss and a mistake. So that's idiot Kristen Cole getting too big for his bridges there, blowing it. And I would like to know if Gwaine Hightower was saying that because of what happened to Aegon, or if it was because of the reaction that they were getting from the small folk, or both. Ultimately, it doesn't matter because it's a mistake. So they took a victory and they turned it into a defeat.
Yeah, I took it as Gwaine Hightower commenting on the fact that they won, but they lost a lot of men, and also their king is in critical condition. I definitely think he was talking about Aegon there rather than reading the room because he was visibly uncomfortable too. That was my favorite part. You could see people are like, oh, no one's applauding and cheering. Haha, okay. But speaking of Aegon, we then transitioned into one of the scenes I was most curious about because of how it's described in the book. In the book, and it's not a spoiler to say this, it talks about how the heat of the dragon flame basically fused the armor to Aegon's body. And this was as disgusting and upsetting and effective a surgical scene as when Ser Jorah Mormont had his grayscale removed on Game of Thrones. Just seeing them have to chiseled the armor off of his body. It was not as visceral, I think, in sort of like the pustules and abscesses that we saw with Jorah Mormont, but this was definitely a super effective scene and definitely not one for the surgery averse. What was your take on this?
I think in my head it was even worse reading it. Like it felt like they really couldn't get some of the metal off.
Yes,
and he became part cyborg.
Yeah.
But that's probably on me. It was really effective. And although, why did they parade him through the streets?
Because they do it so he's in the box because they don't want anyone to know he's been injured.
Yeah, but that's what I'm saying. Why just bring the box right there? Like, don't let them. Because if I'm sitting there, right, I'm like, okay, you got the dead dragon head. And then you got this weird box. What's going on with the box? That's all I'd want to talk about. I'd be walking around Flea's Bottom for a month. For a month, being like, but come on, guys. What do you think was in the box?
But tell me about that mystery box. Look, they clearly spoke with J.J. Abrams. That's where the big twist is. And the big twist is that Aegon is not dead. For me, it was probably just... It was probably the safest way to, they know they're all heading to the palace. He's surrounded by his like elite guards, and it's the safest way to ensure that nothing happens to that box because, you know, if they're trying to bring it in surreptitiously, people might be like, oh, was that a shipment of fresh produce and cabbage that I can then attack these people for because there's no food anywhere and I'm starting to get desperate? That's my only inclination there. It was strange just to see it. Like, I was like, that's got to be Aegon, right? But maybe I think they were also doing that to build some suspense because you're left wondering, if you haven't read the book, you're left wondering, did Aegon die? Because it looks like he might have died at the end of last episode. Now we know that's very much not the case. He is in critical condition. He does utter a very feeble and pathetic, calls out to his mother later in the episode. But the thing for me that was a real twist of the knife is when, you know, you see Maester Orwyle and Alicent and all of these people. Like, you have the Silent Sisters there ready to maybe administer last rites, and it's looking really dire. And then the creepiest man in all of King's Landing right now, surpassing Larys Strong because of how they framed him this episode, Aemond One Eye. He just comes to the foot of the bed and looks at his brother with this little kind of shit-eating grin and just says, "Someone will need to rule in his stead." And it's like, oh my God, you have a singular focus right now. Whoa, so this was Aemond's big power play episode. Let's talk about that for a bit. What was your impression of Aemond this episode?
Yeah, you know, if he doesn't try to kill his brother, that is a very different moment, which is him taking charge in a moment of crisis. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of the Aemond that we get in Fire and Blood. And we talked about this last week. The show is changing his characterization quite a bit. That's fine. It's just a change. But the fact that he did try to kill his brother and then came in and it was the first thing he did, not how is he? Is he alive? Boom, let's go. I'm making my move right now. I love that. I love the whole scene. As you mentioned, the bringing in the Silent Sisters is such a great touch. It's one of those things where you just want to find the person who thought of that and be like, thank you. Thank you. Fantastic work by you. I also loved getting to see the Grand Maester work because Orwyle is really good at his job. And the show did not address an idea from the book, and it was the right decision. Okay, this would not have worked for the book. It's just a bonus thing to enjoy when you read Fire and Blood. That there is definitely some hints that the previous Grand Maester might have helped hurry along Viserys' death. That there's this idea that the Maesters are not really working for Viserys' best interest because Orwyle comes in and he really improves Viserys and then he's kicked off the job and Viserys gets worse again. Uh-huh. And if you're wondering why, it's because the theory is that the Maesters are very close to the High Towers, and this is the Maesters' chance to get one of their own on the throne. So they want to move Viserys along, and then they're going to support Otto's power play and Alicent's power play to put Aegon. Just a little quick rant for those of you who maybe know it or don't, but it's good stuff. But as for Aemond, yeah, I mean, he is singularly focused now. He wants to rule, and everybody around him knows exactly who he is. I loved the interactions that Alicent had with Cole, where she's asking him, and Cole is obviously struggling with it because he knows exactly who Aemond is now. He knows exactly what Aemond did. He's a monster, but he won't say it out loud, but the subtext is all there. Helena picks up on it. You know, we have that amazing scene later in the episode where Aemond's in front of the throne and she says, you know, was it worth the price you paid? It's so good. And the only downside is I do think it makes Aemond a little one-notey.
It definitely plays up his villainy factor because, you know, he's always been sort of like a headstrong, egotistical, violent person. So it doesn't a lot of this doesn't surprise me. But with the way they characterized how he like sort of chased down Luke last season after they went to Storm's End, that was played off as like he was harassing his brother, wanted to get his revenge, but he didn't mean to kill. Sorry, he didn't want to kill his nephew, not his brother. Freudian slip here. I don't think he wanted to kill his nephew. At least that's how it came across. He just wanted to scare the daylights out of him. And now he seems like a supervillain at times. Like the way they frame him inside the throne room, where it's like all dark and stormy. I just kept thinking of like evil Morty. It's like I couldn't get that image out of my head at times. He is definitely a lot craftier than I think people give him credit for, but I think a lot of people are waking up to just how crafty he really is. And I also loved how the dynamic seems to have shifted between him and Kristen Cole, where Kristen knows who he is, and Kristen is also sort of reckoning with the fact that he was present at the Dragon Pit during that ill-fated coronation, but I don't think he saw just how deadly dragons fighting can be until the Battle of Rook's Rest. And now it's very much like the Oppenheimer moment and of like, what have I done? Like I am become Death Destroyer of Worlds. Like he has helped to facilitate dragon on dragon warfare. And, you know, a theme that throughout this episode, it's the small folk who pay the price, like the innocent who pay the price. And Aemond clearly does not give a hoot about the innocent. He just wants to exert control with an iron fist.
Yeah. And, you know, the Cole stuff, I have no sympathy for Cole, who is finding his last vestiges of humanity, one of the boohoo babies, as I'm going to call him from now on. But he sees that fire and blood, when their words are one thing, fire and blood and action in reality is quite another. And, you know, he also, what makes him so detestable, I've said this before, is that he's not an idiot. That he does actually know right from wrong, and he just chooses wrong. He chooses to be a bad person. He also recognizes that we've unleashed something that now can't be stopped. And the only way forward is to do even more terrible things. And it's funny because he presents that way, and then later in the episode, we get the other side of this war, Damon doing exactly that, doing those really terrible things, and he's presented as far more of a villain, whereas people just kind of haven't picked up yet. The small folk are worried, but the people of the realm aren't seeing the greens for being the equal monsters that they are. But they are. They just so far have done a better job at hiding it.
Or they just haven't been doing things as readily yet. They've been ready to do them, as Damon clearly illustrated. And that's also another thing where the show's doing a really diligent job, I would say. And it's not good or bad, but they're really trying to hammer home the parallels between Damon and Aemond. Not just because their names are anagrams, not just because they're related, but they want to show these people who are power-hungry second sons who are vying for control, and the grotesque lengths they're willing to go to, even perhaps sacrificing people close to them or, you know, resources that they might need later in this sort of single-minded pursuit of power. And, you know, Damon is very on the nose this episode, being like, you should call me king, not king consort. That last word seems a bit unnecessary, doesn't it? And also basically just giving the Blackwoods authorization to, you know, rape, pillage, terrorize the countryside, stuff that the crown can't be seen doing, which is just the most vile euphemism when he has that conversation.
But by the way, then they do it under the banner of Rhaenyra. What Will and Blackwood, like, you had You had two sets of instructions. Do
Yes.
horrible war crimes, but don't let it be known that it's coming from the crown. And then he's like, okay, definitely let everyone know this is coming from the crown.
Sorry, I stopped listening when you said do horrible war crimes, and I said, all right, bet, let's do this.
I gotta say, Dan, as someone who hates the Brackens and came into the show loving the Blackwoods, tough episode for me.
Oh, yeah. It's
Tough episode for me. I have got to, I'm going to have to take a step back and do some reevaluating about how I feel about these people because Lord Amos Bracken in this episode, like you said, was such a badass that, we choose fire. That was incredible. And then Willem Blackwood, not incredible. Also, if anybody is curious, they are definitely taking characters from the Blackwoods and the Brackens and just condensing or taking names of other figures and giving them to them. So it's not everything you're seeing there is one for one, even in terms of the players involved in the game.
Yeah, they're forming a sort of like Rat King of characters where they're all tied together by the plot line. But that's fine. We only have so many episodes to get through, and we still meet a bunch of nameless river lords and ladies this episode. So, they will find time to just sprinkle in a gaggle of weirdos every single time. But I want to talk a bit about before I want to take a step back and talk about the Green Council because I thought that might have been the best scene this episode with how that plays out, because it starts like any other Green Council scene where we have a crisis. This here is a crisis of succession, or in this case, regency, and seeing the entire council turn on Alicent under the guise of, well, we can't put you back as the regent if we're trying to say that we support male primogeniture. Why could we put you as regent? Instead, we have to put your son, whose impetuousness and just scheming has already cost everyone quite a lot. But what the best part of this scene wasn't Aemond's slow stroll across the table. That was great. When he just slowly walks to the other side of the table to take his now rightful seat and picks up that little speaking orb.
Our favorite little balls. I got
to get a speaking orb for the next time I'm in a meeting. Just see what happens.
How do we not have those for the show? How are we not sitting? I mean, what are we doing?
Yeah, if we were not on opposite coast, then we would definitely have speaking orbs. But the best scene is when Alicent she starts to like dissociate. It feels like it's an anxiety attack or a panic attack, just sort of reckoning with everything that's happening, and the way that the sound sort of fades out and we just slowly push in on Alicent and stay on her. I thought that was just phenomenally done. From a filmmaking perspective, Olivia Cooke did a phenomenal job selling that through. What was your take on this sequence?
Yeah, best part of the episode, her performance there when she's saying nothing. Here's Alicent, every decision she has made, everything she has helped put in motion, and at a moment where she thinks I'm the most qualified person to be in charge, she's not only not given that position, she is completely shut out. And she now realizes that once more she is a spectator in her own life, and her life is falling apart. As she said last week, it's been weeks of nothing but tragedy and horribleness and death. And here, all of a sudden, now she has no control over what comes next. Like you said, the filmmaking to stay on her, the way they use the sound. Although I would recommend when people go back, rewatch that scene with the subtitles on, because there is actual stuff coming from Aemond that's important about closing the city gates, about cutting down the rat catchers and all that stuff.
Well, he says the rat catchers clearly at the end. That's the way they end the scene. But you hear them making the plans of like, oh, if the people are upset, well, don't let them leave, which is just colossal miscalculation.
He's also focused on Harrenhal finally. He's also focused on the people who are on his council getting their own bannermen in action. I also really loved what preceded that, which is them, like you said, they talk about why she can't have this. This scene mirrors the one that Rhaenyra has with her Black Council, where they are basically, kind of like talking around her, not even to her, because they don't respect her enough. But the difference here is the Greens are claiming that Rhaenyra has no claim. As it's pointed out to Alicent, what would it look like if we put a woman in charge when we're claiming that women can't be in charge? And my favorite part before Olivia Cooke's silent meltdown is that she turns to Lara Strong. And this is incredible acting from Matthew Needham. this is the most honest. This might be the only honest moment we have ever gotten from Lara Strong. And if you watch, you can see how his delivery, how his entire persona is slightly different than it normally is, where he's doing this smiling, coy, pretending to be dumb. It's just so honest, and he seems like he feels bad for Alicent here, but he can't even. He's not playing for his own purposes. This is actually what's best for all of them. It's an incredible bit of acting that shows just how good he has been. You know, we've appreciated him, but to see this element of him being an actual, honest, sincere person shows how good he has been at being insincere and manipulative. It's really good stuff.
Yeah, I mean, it's great because she's especially like, well, I can at least rely on you. I know I can at least rely on you to work your silver tongue to sort of sway these people. But he's like, actually, I can't. This is what we have to do if we want to play the long game here. And, Lara Strong is all about the long game. Just like any other master or mistress of whispers, they have to be playing 4D chess at all times, always. But speaking of the Mistress of Whispers, speaking of the other side of this equation, I want to talk about Rhaenyra, Mysaria, and the Black Council, because this episode, Rhaenyra spent a good chunk of it just getting straight up lightly bullied by her council members. And it's Sir Alfred Broom, you said, is the one
Sir
who...
Alfred Broom, yeah.
Alfred Broom is the one who sort of pushes back against her, saying, well, what do you know of warfare? It's the gentler sex knows nothing of the strategy and execution of battles. And she gets a nice zinger in there where, what are you talking about? We've both known peace our entire lives. My father was a peacetime king. My grandfather ensured there was peace. And your entire life have only known peace. Yes, you've probably grown up in a martial tradition, but it's definitely kind of crazy to see that play out there. And it's a good point for her to make, but it is still frustrating because, she just kind of asks a question that none of them are willing to answer. What would you have me do? What was your impression of the Black Council scenes this episode?
She has not been a good leader so far, and she's kind of reaping what she sowed, right? But what's frustrating to me is that she keeps volunteering to go directly into battle, to put her life on the line. And they are right that she can't actually do that, because if she falls, the whole thing's lost and they might all lose their heads. Like, yes. That's the most likely outcome for all of them if something happens to her. But I just wish somebody would give her a little credit for being brave and being willing to go out there herself. She at no point has she ever said, like, well, I'm staying and you're going. Her first instinct is, I'm going. There's some great stuff in this episode with her where she's so frustrated that she's basically has to stick there. And this is a recurring theme in this franchise. This is what Robert Baratheon found with the crown. He thought being king meant he got to do whatever he wanted, but it's the complete opposite. Power is limiting. It limits what you can do. You think I'm the king, I'm the queen, I can do anything I want. Well, you really can't. And that's what she's learning here. And I think that in terms of her Black Council, the move to send Alfred Broom to Harrenhal to basically figure out what's going on with Damon, it reminded me a lot of Jon Snow and Sir Alliser Thorne, when he named him, the head ranger and kind of tried to give him a position of power to take an enemy and make him an ally. This is slightly different in that Alfred Broom is an ally who is antagonistic. I definitely liked the whole, basically her saying, like, yeah, you're getting on my nerves, but I also know you're loyal to me. You would never support the Greens. And him saying, like, not while I lived. Although me bringing up Sir Alliser Thorne and saying, sometimes you bring in your enemies, I don't know if that's a good sign. And that's not giving anything away, because at this point, they are making enough changes that we're getting into territories with some of these characters where we actually don't know if things we think we know are ever going to happen. There are some major changes that have already happened. Some of them very good. So I'm not giving anything away with that observation.
Yeah, I will say that's the one thing I thought that Rhaenyra did well this episode was sort of ultimately stand her ground and delegate responsibility effectively. Except for in Jace's case, which is where he's felt the need to sort of go rogue himself, but being a child, he has a bit more leeway there than Rhaenyra does, because she already tried to run off and it did not go well for her. But yeah, the way she sends him off to be like, well, I trust you to handle this with Damon, not because I don't want you here, I don't, but because I trust that you have our best interest at heart. And the fact that she calls it out directly at the end of the episode, I need to know if he is raising a host for himself or for me. And to me, the most telling thing was that his reaction, Sir Alfred's reaction, is like, he wouldn't dare. What are you talking about, dude? have you ever spoken to Damon? Have you ever met anyone else in Westeros? It was interesting to see that level of assuming propriety and loyalty supersedes everything. So yeah, it was definitely fascinating to see there. But I think the most effective delegation of task here was Rhaenyra delegating a very important recruitment mission to Baela, to get her grandfather, Sir Corlys Velaryon, to get off his throne and come be the hand of the queen. What was your thoughts about this and Baela, this episode, and that whole sequence?
Finally, I mean, why did it take a tragedy for her to name Corlys Hand of the Queen? That as soon as he came back healthy and is ready to go, that would have been the first thing I would have done. Or if she had named his wife because he wasn't healthy, and then after she died, given it to him. It does seem a little bit here like, oh, okay, yeah, my wife's dead, and now you want to keep me in the fold. Well, yeah, and that's why she should have done it before. And it also would have helped, right, when she was often in King's Landing with her silly little plot to end the war. There would have been somebody there to take charge. There would have been a voice to command. I really like, though, that she recognized, if I go to him, this probably is not going to work. So she goes to his granddaughter, Baela, and Bethany Antonia is so fantastic in this episode. That scene is incredible. She's so good. She basically appeals to his pride, to his honor, while also calling out his bull crap, and basically saying like, you didn't own my grandmother. The only part I questioned was she said, you went on all these great adventures, you did all these things, you brought back all this wealth. I wonder if everyone knew it was just for her. I don't know if I totally buy that, but I definitely do think he loved her, so it's fine. It's more important that she believes that. Yeah,
I thought it was effective in the context of the scene where she's laying it on super thick, especially when he's probably feeling incredibly sentimental and aggrieved. So I definitely see why that would be effective there, even if it's not necessarily that he's just a saily boy who wanted to go around the world a bunch of times.
He's Lord Corlys, saily boy.
Yeah, that should be his real nickname, not the sea snake.
The way that scene ends, I want to come back to it later, though.
Okay, absolutely. We'll come back to that. Instead, we'll go to another impactful youth this episode, Jace, who I keep seeing people pair him with with images of Hansel from Zoolander online, and they make me laugh every single time. I think he does a phenomenal job. He just has incredible bone structure. But I did like to see his sort of off-the-cuff idea to go treat with the phrase. Famously, not an idea that ever backfires in the world of Westeros or Game of Thrones. But what was your takeaway from Jace's mission to the twins?
This was my big nerd out scene. I loved the connections here with Game of Thrones, but they weren't forced. This is servicing the story. So he goes to the Freys. The Freys are a relatively new noble family. At this point, I think it's by Game of Thrones, they've basically been around for 600 years as a noble family. So here it's only 400. You might say, 400 years, that's a long time. Not in Westeros. Things go back tens of thousands of years. The Starks are going back to the first men. But we see that the Freys, they still have the crossing. That's why they got rich. That's why they got powerful. Robb Stark enters a deal with Lord Walder Frey because he needs to march his army through quickly. This is exactly what Jace wants the Northmen. He wants Cregan Stark to be able to do, to get through quickly, just like Robb will 200 years later. And we also see the Freys reaching for more. Walder Frey wanted to marry one of his daughters to a king. That was the deal that Robb broke. That's what led to the Red Wedding. Here, the Freys are saying, we want Harrenhal. We want Harrenhal. And I really don't. I don't know. I don't care about Harrenhal, who has it, who doesn't. I feel like Jace kind of agrees with me. Like,
yeah,
fine, take it, because the one of the weird things about the Riverlands, and one of the reasons they're so important and why they're such a focus for both armies in this war, there are so many men there that the Freys can call more bannermen than their own Lord Paramount, the Tullys. This is also true of the Blackwoods and the Brackens. There are just massive armies out there, even bigger than the Tullys can put together. The Tullys can call, the Freys and the Brackens and the Blackwoods, so those are their bannermen. But in terms of like the houses sworn directly to them, they're bigger. So getting the Freys on board is a very big deal. I also like Jace is weird in the sense that he is Rhaenyra's son. He is a Targaryen. He might, definitely. He's obviously bastard born, but he's still her son. He was raised by her, but he feels so different. Even the way he talks and acts feels different, and it really kind of shows that he's not pure Targaryen. And I like that his interactions with them, his interactions with his mother. He also seems like, if you were looking for an heir, this is a good heir to have. If you wanted to pass on the throne to somebody that would be a good leader, and with them being betrothed to Baela, what a king and queen they would make someday.
Yeah, he's demonstrated that he has a pretty clear-eyed sense about strategy, even when he does want to rush off to battle, which I get. It's the hot-blooded nature of youth, but the fact that he's able to suss out the importance of the crossing and the Freys and the twins and makes this overture to them. Yeah, maybe he stepped a little outside of his lane, but even Rhaenyra is like, yeah, good job. Don't do that again, but good job. So it's nice that she sort of understands and appreciates what he's trying to do, as everyone is sort of chafing under this inability to put themselves in harm's way when they want to act. I think Rhaenyra had a great line about, I'm a dragon rider. Like, sitting around here is just driving me crazy. And that definitely seems to be the case with everyone we've seen in this show so far who is a dragon rider. Their blood can run hot because they understand the need for action, because they can enter into a conflict like nobody else from above. And, that's definitely something that everyone, we see it in the Eyrie as well. We're vulnerable from above. Everyone is impregnable from ground attacks, but as soon as a flappy boy comes in breathing hot fire, then it's game over for everyone. That's the repeated mention about Harrenhal in the books, is that, oh yeah, by the way, it's super vulnerable from above. And we see this episode, that's because it doesn't have a goddamn ceiling.
I will say, and we're going to probably get into this a little bit with the Damon and the Riverlands, I am starting to, I guess worry is the right word, about some of the butterfly effects for changes they're making. The events in the Riverlands, as they are being presented on the show, are dramatically different from Fire and Blood, and those are meaningful changes. What we don't know is what they mean just yet, because we haven't seen how this played out. There are things that I think are very important in the future that definitely happen, and I think will definitely happen on the show, but the specifics around them, I'm curious to see. I'm going to go in with an open mind, though. I'm not prejudging it, but there's definitely, and George R. R. Martin talked about this with Game of Thrones. He talked about this in like season 2 or 3 or 4, something like that. Like butterfly effects. You make a small change in this season, you get rid of this character, and then it has huge ramifications 5 years later. That's probably going to happen here too.
Yeah, people are still looking for, what was her name, Lady Stoneheart?
Dan, I thought, come on, I don't want to talk about it.
Who knows? Maybe she could be just out of frame.
If you really want to laugh, there are old articles on Nerdist.com where you can see me being like, oh, there's a rumor from the set. They're definitely doing Lady Stoneheart, no question. Boom, mark it. Here we go. And it's like, oh, they were hanging people. Okay.
Right. Maybe if we got a season 9, that's where they would have all come together. Who can say? But let's talk about the Riverlands. Let's talk about the booniest of doggles this episode, and that is Damon's plan to bring the Riverlords to heel. I mean, he does successfully manage to get House Bracken to bend the knee through having House Blackwood commit unspeakable atrocities on the innocent. But I don't know. It feels like Damon he's usually so sure of himself, and this place is just giving him one existential crisis after another. I mean, we start we start seeing him this episode having a sexy nightmare about his mom, the late great Emma Targaryen.
That's Alyssa.
Alyssa, I'm sorry, Alyssa.
Yeah.
I misspoke.
Yeah, no, don't. I'm and prepping for this. Even the names are starting to wear me down.
I got the right vowel. So Alyssa. We're getting more nightmares here. We're getting more of the occult. In some of the ways they framed some of the shots of this episode, I was like, okay, this framing feels a little extreme to me. But there's like a reaction shot of Alice Rivers where I'm like, this looks like it would be in a horror movie, and it feels a little out of place here. But what are your thoughts on how this relationship is progressing and sort of the nightmares that continually plague Damon?
Careful what you wish for. For the last 2 weeks, I said, give me all of the dreams. Give them to me. I did not know they were going to get so Oedipal. I could have done without this one. To be a fan of Song of Ice and Fire is to accept all the incestuous relationships, but I did not need that one. I got to be so careful here. I always like to just see Targaryens, see these historical figures. So to see his mother, quick backstory on her, Alyssa Targaryen, she was married to her brother Balon the Brave, who we heard referenced last week. Ulf the White claim that's his father, that he's a bastard.
This was 2 weeks ago now, I think.
Time is meaningless.
Yeah, the guy in the bar when Aegon came in.
Yeah, that. So this is Alyssa. She dies very young. She's only 24 years old. She dies shortly after giving birth to her third child, also named Aegon, who does not even live for a year, so don't worry, you don't have to keep track of him. Damon is only 3 years old. Viserys is like 7 years old, so Damon doesn't really know her. I think that we talk sometimes of things being on the nose. It's not, things being on the nose aren't necessarily bad, but this was just, I don't know, like, it's just getting less interested how... He's kind of pathetic, and he's kind of losing it. And I'm hoping that it really is Harrenhal or Alice Rivers messing with his mind that's making him like this and losing his complexity. One thing that was interesting, though, is that he was a lot like his mother, Alyssa. She was more of a tomboy. She was fierce. She was a good fighter. There's also a story about her wedding night with her brother husband that is infamous in Westeros lore, but this is a show that you are meant to be able to listen to with your kids in the
family-friendly
car.
podcast.
Yeah, we don't want you to have to turn the show off while you're driving in the car with the kids, but look it up. So that definitely was an Easter egg in terms of the dream he had with his mother. She also was Maely's first dragon rider. You know, maybe Rhaenys dying has something to do with him having this dream. I don't know, but I didn't like the fact that they later had Alice reference his mother, because it sure seemed like she's giving up the game, which is, I know what's going on in your dreams. And I'm not sure why she would do that unless she was totally confident that she's controlling him. And maybe she is, because once again, he just lets her do what she wants and wraps his hand and take care of him.
I mean, he does seem like he's kind of out of it or under some sort of like spell in a sense, because he doesn't really push back on her too much. He doesn't really tell her to do too many things that is, hey, watch your tone. She calls him out pretty directly about how he doesn't have leave to do what he's doing from the Queen Rhaenyra, how he is perpetuating atrocities on the innocent, and how she knows exactly what's going on in his head, and he's sort of coming apart at the seams. You know, he blacks back in or quacks back in at the dinner table eating duck.
Dan, I'm sorry. You gotta cook duck more than that. I assume. I don't make a lot of duck, but that was like.
No. As long as you get the Maillard reaction, that Mallard is good to eat. They like it nice and bloody at Harrenhal. They only eat cursed meats.
Also, they sit too close together.
I did
5 of you eating. Get away from each other.
I loved the weird reaction shot of the guy being like, I prefer the goose. He's so close to Damon, and he looks like a crazy person. And I loved Weird Goose Man.
Forget the nightmare sexy dream with your mom. Like, get away from me. Just sit 5 feet. It's like going to a movie theater and there's only 5 people and they're all next to you. Like, spread out.
Eat a vegetable as well. Like, you can't subsist off of raw duck and overcooked goose alone. So I liked the scenes this episode. Also, I liked the sort of conflict that's coming to a head. You know, we sort of mentioned this last time about socioeconomic policy and economic policy in particular in Westeros, where Simon Strong mentions, oh, by the way, we only have enough coin to buy a couple ducks to undercook. We don't have money for repairs. Can you ask your wife, the queen, who we pledged to subsidize refurnishing this nightmare castle? And I love that Damon's like, I shall do it myself. Whatever you do, don't tell my wife.
We do get there are a lot of places referenced in this episode, and I have a full list, and I realize nobody actually wants to know that. Just know that all the places they talk about are either in the Riverlands or the Crown Lands, which are closer than you think. Go look at a map of Westeros. The Harrenhal is near the God's Eye, which is kind of right near that line between the Riverlands and right where the Crown Lands are. And Damon is saying, go to this place and get livestock. Go to this place and find people who are going to come and fight for us. And it's just all these different things that he's throwing around. And then we kind of find out later where he is going to get some of this money. The Blackwoods, they loot the septs and burn them down. So that, there's coin there to pay for stuff. The bigger thing though is obviously exactly what Rhaenyra fears. Damon has gone into service for himself. He tells Alice Rivers why, nobody will ever accept her. She can win this war, but she won't be able to be queen. He's delusional. He's absolutely delusional. People hate him. And I don't know what claim he thinks he has. Even if they win this war, like, people are going to look at him as illegitimate, because the whole point was Rhaenyra was supposed to take the Iron Throne over Viserys' eldest son, which is how things have worked. It's how things have been established here. Not just with the Targaryens. This is kind of how most houses do it. Like, it goes to the son. Not always. In fact, we see someone we maybe talk about later, Lady Jane Arryn, who is, in charge over the Eyrie. But Damon is he's really lost it. He is delusional if he thinks any of this stuff is going to happen. And as weird as it was to have a bunch of unnamed Riverland lords or ladies, they let him know, like, we're not raising a banner for a tyrant. That's what you are. So
and they also invoke should we expect any less from the man who had a baby slaughtered in his mother's arms? And he's like, I didn't do that. Sorry, I'm hallucinating my wife again.
And by the way, news travels fast in Westeros, right?
Not
only does everybody know about Prince Jaehaerys, everybody knows about Rook's Rest already. Like, yeah, that was not a secret. They're Simon Strong is talking about it. Lady Jane is talking about it. This was out there quickly. The Greens wanted to claim their victory quickly.
And also you got to assume if they're already back at King's Landing, like, they've been traveling and they were probably just firing off ravens willy-nilly too. Word does travel fast, but that's because the Greens need to win this propaganda war if they want to sort of maintain their stranglehold over the small folk and even some of these lesser lords and bannermen, because it's clearly paying dividends for them so far. But speaking about dividends, speaking about investing in the future, maybe planting some seeds for the future, I want to talk about maybe the biggest sort of like cliffhangery thing that happened to this episode, where Jace and Rhaenyra concoct a plan where they realize, hey, we have a lot of dragon riders, and you know how you sired 3 strong boys with my father, who we shall not name, R.I.P. Breakbones. What if there's other people out there who sired other dragon seeds, as Ulf the White called them? What if those people could potentially be recruited to our cause because we need some dragon riders to ride on these dragons? What was your? I got to say, from my perspective, I was surprised. I thought this was going to be something they were going to start looking at the end of the season, at the earliest. So I was kind of surprised to see them bring in this particular plot so early, but I don't know. They've been laying the groundwork for it. But what was your take on this, Mikey?
I'm not surprised it happened now. Again, because they need to get going here with some of this stuff. Again, this is a totally fine episode. I'm not complaining about it, but you couldn't have this type of episode 3 in a row. So stuff needs to happen, and we need to get dragon riders on these unclaimed dragons. Rhaenyra says, I can't go out there myself. And he's like, well, we got dragons. She's like, well, great. Nobody to ride them. And he basically points out, like, we don't know that. Let's find them dragon riders. And she says, and my lore-loving heart did cringe just a smidge that she says dragon lords. What that means is those with Valyrian blood. Even if you were not necessarily a dragon, an actual dragon rider, dragon lord, you basically have to have Valyrian blood. And Jace says, well, that's what the Valyrian history said to gild us, right? They wanted to make us look special, and nobody else would even try. But there are lots of people related to the Targaryens and even the Valyrians throughout Westeros. And not only, they didn't reference this here, which I was a little surprised by just because of the scene we got with a certain white-haired coward claiming to be a bastard. They didn't mention the dragon seeds, but there are also clearly many Targaryen bastards, especially on Dragonstone, especially in King's Landing. And I don't think we're gonna spoil anything here. I think we're going to point out the context clues that have been here the entire time, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yes, I think, look, if you're worried about any potential spoilers, this is a secondary spoiler warning, but we think it's sort of been made pretty obvious by the amount of time these characters have been featured on the show. The obviously is Ulf, who comes out and says, I am a Targaryen, right? He uses the term dragon seed.
Yeah, he says I'm a dragon seed. That is clearly a major prospect. Otherwise, why are we spending time with this person? This is what I'm talking about, the context clues, right? Who else have we been spending a lot of time with who has no other important role in this, who also happens to look a lot like Ulf? Our boy Hugh, who is trying to save his daughter, who has literally turned gray. I'm not optimistic for her, even if they get to Tumbleton. But even bigger was last week, the last conversation Corlys had with his wife when she met Alan of Hull, and she realized who he is. And she said, he should be raised up. Talking about that scene with Baela, coming back to the scene with Baela. He says, I would name you my heir. And she says, I am. She says, I'm blood and fire. Did you pick up on that?
She says, I am fire and blood.
No. She says, I'm blood and fire. She
says blood and fire?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, one of us, yeah. So, and she says, the Lord of Driftmark must be of sea and salt. Well, who did Rhaenys just say should be raised up? Well, there's another, right, the bastard son of Corlys Velaryon. The Velaryons are from Valyria, and he has a brother. And those are the four biggest prospects the show has raised. Whether or not they all claim a dragon, you might be sitting there saying, I've read Fire and Blood too. I know exactly what's going to happen. No, you don't, because there's something curious here. Jace mentions Vermithor and Silverwing. Now, those were the dragons of King Jaehaerys and his wife, Queen Alicent. They are, Vermithor especially is like the only dragon who can pretty much go toe-to-toe with Vhagar, like that big. They also have wild dragons living on Dragonstone, but they don't reference them at all. They don't.
Yeah.
And I thought that was weird, and we have not seen the next episode, so we really don't know. If they're only talking about there being 2 dragons to claim, that is a very, very different story than if they are talking about potentially 5 dragons to claim.
I wonder if they will bring up the wild dragons down the line, because I personally, I love that part in the book. They all have some hilarious names, and I think there's some of the most intimidating dragons out there, especially one of them. But I think that if they are not going to proceed with a certain character we alluded to in a previous episode that might be getting excised from the story, then maybe they're not going to introduce that, and they're just going to keep it to sort of these more core named dragons that are part of the sort of Targaryen clutch.
Yeah, it's a wait and see, but it's I would prefer the wild dragons be included. I would very much prefer the character that we are afraid they're going to cut not be cut. That'll very, very much change the story, and I don't think you will find a single reader of Fire and Blood who would defend that if that's what happens. But we're not going to be pre-mad. We are not going to prejudge. We are going to go with the flow.
Yes, and since we're going with the flow and since we've been dragging things out, it's time to wrap up this episode with our MVP. Mikey, who is your MVP of the episode?
Bela, so good. We talked about Olivia Cook being fantastic, though. She always is. And she also, as much as I don't like the Greens or Alicent, she does put Kristen Cole in his place. That line, "I didn't give you leave to use my name," was as cold as it gets. But this is Bela, assuming that I know what the MVP of the episode means, which I never do.
Yes. Oh, well, you were right to say it, and you should say it. Bela is my unequivocal MVP of this episode as well. Single highest impact player on the field. She was the one that first gave people the heads up that Kristen Cole was on the march, and now she is making big moves to bring Corlys Velaryon back into the fold so he stops going off on sad sailing missions and trying to avoid talking to people and trying to avoid his duty because they need his expertise. She's the one who's able to get it. And she's also a voice of wisdom when she talks with Jace. She sort of talks him out of doing something far stupider than he probably had planned. Like he was going to go off to Harrenhal to be like, well, Father, Uncle, I must tell you that you must come home and respect Mother. Well, that would not go well for him. That would just be like the inverse of Luke going to Storm's End. But she was definitely the most impactful player this episode, and I'm very excited to see what other changes she can effect as we move forward, because she's rapidly becoming what feels like the most important person in Rhaenyra's inner circle, maybe second to Mysaria. And that's a good segue for, we want to talk about any other Easter eggs or moments that fans might have missed. And that is the fact that Mysaria still has a very robust network of spies, and that she's able to smuggle someone into the city. And I'm very intrigued to see how her Whisper campaign is going to play out, because, we had that line from Rhaenyra, can like whispers tear down stone? And as we've seen from Game of Thrones and this show, yes, they can.
Yeah, they're going to finally engage in their own little propaganda war, which is Mysaria realizes the people of King's Landing are freaking out, and they knew peace under Rhaenyra's father, and now they know the complete opposite. They know war and death and famine. We're going to start letting them know Rhaenyra will be your savior. And this is the type of stuff you need to do, because there's almost 1 million people in King's Landing. To get them on your side would be huge for Rhaenyra. We only referenced her, but Lady Jane Heron is a fascinating character. I loved her portrayal here, where she is fierce and she does not back down, and she is furious in her righteousness about what was promised and what was delivered. I thought Rhaena was also great in that scene. I really liked it. Lady Jane, the show kind of just dropped this, but if you remember, Damon was married to somebody from the Vale, and he killed his wife in season 1, and then he said he was going to claim Runestone as his own. Well, he obviously didn't, and that was Lady Jane Arryn who ruled against him. So she has her own problems with Daemon Targaryen, even though she has pledged her support for the Rhaenyra and the Blacks. I also did like that, as we talked about the phrase, everybody wants something. Nobody just is like, yes, I bend the knee, this is who I swore to. Everyone's got an angle, except for House Stark. House Stark doesn't ask for anything. In fact, they say, we will help. We just have an even bigger responsibility to the living. My boys, the Starks, come at me. Come at me and say something bad about them. Go for it. I also, Mysaria's plan, they send Alinda, whose father is on the Black Council. They send her to King's Landing. She knows that she can find a gold cloak because they're still loyal to Damon, which means they're loyal to Rhaenyra, and they hate the High Towers. And she is quite curious, and we didn't talk about this a couple weeks ago because it just seemed like it wasn't that big a deal. She goes and finds Diana. Diana, last we saw her, she was the bar maiden who got slapped and didn't like it. She was also the person that Aegon raped in season 1.
Oh.
That Alicent gave the moon tea to and basically threatened her not to say anything, politely threatened her. Well, Diana, why go to Diana of all people? Does she still have connections in the Red Keep? That's an interesting person, and it ties into one of the things I think this show does the best. Actions have consequences, and those are often consequences you can never foresee. The way you treat one person today could be your downfall tomorrow. I love that they keep going back to that.
Yeah, I mean, look, it keeps going back to what Alice Rivers was saying. It's the crimes against the innocent that any upright man would repudiate. These are the things that are being perpetuated and now are going to come back to haunt the people in power, especially as other folks get elevated to unexpected positions of power, like Missaria now being formally elevated to sort of Mistress of Whispers for this for the Black Council. So,
last one, the lords and ladies of the Riverlands, they say the Riverlands are an ancient place watched by gods old and new. The God's Eye, the sacred werewolves, the children of the forest. I don't know if the show is going to lean into this as much as I want it to. I had always hoped Game of Thrones would, and they didn't. They never even went to the God's Eye. Game of Thrones, the showrunners actively tried to shy away from the magical elements of the story. They tried to use it sparingly because they thought if they overdid it, we can debate if that was a good idea or not. But if you read the books, Martin's novels, magic is a much bigger factor. And what's very important here is that magic kind of dies out when the dragons die out. So by the time you get to the story of Game of Thrones, there's less magic in the world. The dragons are here right now. There's a lot of magic in the world. And we talked about how the Maesters almost certainly conspired to kill off the dragons after this. And that's not a spoiler because we know Daenerys is, births dragons later. I really hope they lean into it. We already know the children of the forest exist. Let's go to the God's Eye. Let's see who's there. Let's see what's going on. Let's lean into this sacred religious aspect of the story. I really hope they do.
Yeah, I mean, there's some real important stuff that could happen in and around the God's Eye, and I'm very curious to see if they will lean into that because of the occult angle they've been playing up with Harrenhal and Alice Rivers. So I think they've primed the pump pretty well. Speaking of other places that were mentioned offhandedly, Tumbleton, I am very curious to see what may happen there. That could be a location of some import in the future. Not a spoiler to say, but just keep that name in your ears and in your hearts. That's all I have. Anything else you have, Mikey?
No, we messed up last week. Vhagar is a she-dragon, and I had some people very politely point that out to me. They are
yes.
right. Sorry about that. We will get that right. Dragons are fascinating. Some people believe that dragons actually can just they don't really have a gender. They just go back and forth. The only way to even tell, the reason you can call a dragon a she-dragon is they lay a clutch of eggs. That's the only way to tell. So the dragon lore is really good. Like if you're just sitting there and I've gone through all my websites and I need to just go read about the dragons of A Song of Ice and Fire. Great stuff.
Yes, that is a basket into which you should put all of your dragon eggs. It's a very fascinating one. We really appreciate it. And that, folks, is all the time that we have for this episode. That's a wrap on our breakdown of House of the Dragon, Season 2, Episode 5. Thank you, as always, for joining us. We're going to be here all season long. And as Mikey mentioned, we have plenty of deep dives into hot D lore waiting for you over on Nerdist.com. Now, Mikey, in the meantime, where can people find you and send you a digital raven?
Burger Mike, all one word, Twitter or Blue Sky. I prefer Blue Sky, but you can send me a message either. And of course, you can always find me writing for the greatest website anybody ever created, Nerdist.com.
All right, and you can find me on that website as well or online at Dan Casey. Anyway, folks, that's all. Thank you for tuning in. In the meantime, though, tell us, what did you think of this episode? What was your favorite moment and why? Let us know in the comments below. And for the latest and greatest in the world of pop culture, make sure you stay tuned to Nerdist.com.